Welcome to another Infographic Instant with Brian Michael. In this episode, we will be looking at the evolution of global legal and financial advisors' competitiveness. The infographic you see in front of you is part of a larger study where we assess the extent to which large financial advisors have managed China's going out policy mergers and acquisitions activity between 2000 to 2014. Now, there's two views about the way advisors, legal and financial advisors, can obtain mandates in a global marketplace for advisory services. The first view is the get big quick view. And that view is that the largest advisors, both legal and financial, will manage to obtain more mandates because large companies operating in emerging markets will prefer the household names, and those with large amounts of capitalization and large numbers of staff, they will prefer those more than the much smaller advisors who might often be based in emerging markets and who might have a less reputable track record. The second view is the small is beautiful view. And in that view, the best way for advisors to compete in emerging markets is not to have a large massified approach to dealing with clients, but is to focus on niche strategies and have local knowledge which they can use in order to conclude a merger or acquisition more successfully with a higher level of profit and so forth. So, turning our attention to the infographic we see in front of us, we notice that the industry, the advisory industry, has evolved over time from big to small. We see such an evolution using 4 data points. The first data point on the far left of the infographic looks at the percent of advisory relations where the target city matches the advisor city. So, in other words, given this disjointed relationship between advisors and their clients, we want to gauge the extent to which advisors start to be located in the cities that their clients are, or their clients choose advisors in their own city rather than going all the way to an international financial center in order to find an advisor. And what we see in these data are that in the early period of going out, advisors worked in the same city as their clients slightly less than 25% of the time. However, in the late period of going out, we see that this match between advisors and their clients in terms of the city that the target company works in and is headquartered in has risen to about 30-35%. The second data point we use to support this argument is whether the financial or legal advisor is based in a top 10 international financial center. Naturally, to the extent that going out companies use advisors that are not in these international financial centers, that suggests that the geographical structure of these advisory relationships are changing. And what we see is that in the early period of going out, roughly 75% of advisory relationships involved a legal or financial advisor working in a top 10 international financial center, where these international financial centers are New York, London, Hong Kong, Singapore, Zurich, Luxembourg, Seoul, Tokyo, and a couple of others that you can read about in the paper. The third data point that we use to support this argument is whether the advisor belongs to a bulge bracket bank in terms of a financial advisor or a big law firm. What we see is that in the early period of going out, roughly 50% of advisors belong to these elite advisory firms. That means that they belong to a top 10 in terms of deal size investment bank or a top 10 law advisory firm. By the late period of going out, though, we see that that proportion of advisors belonging to that elite strata of advisors fell to roughly 30%. The fourth data point looks at the percent of advisors dealing with private companies rather than state-owned enterprises. We know that in the early period of going out, the Chinese government encouraged state-owned enterprises to engage in cross-border mergers and acquisitions. Now, we would expect an evolution over time in the nature of those mergers and acquisitions as the private sector starts to respond to its own economic incentives rather than the incentives promulgated by the government. And what we see in the data are that in the early period of going out, roughly 35-40% of advisory relationships involved private sector companies, whereas in the late period of going out, we see roughly 60-65% of advisory relationships involving a private company. So taking all of these four variables or data points together, one conclusion that we can tentatively draw, and of course we will illustrate this in much more detail in further infographics, that conclusion we can draw is that going out advisory relationships have evolved away from elite advisors based in international financial centers and more toward emerging market smaller advisors. This has been another Infographic Instant with Brian Michael.